Sir Pale is here for 2 months saying knowledge without wisdom is like a sword without a scabbard. Not that I know what that is. It wounds both the enemy and its owner. With each different subject you talk about, I feel you give us a part of your wisdom. We build a scabbard of our own. Thank you, X. Keep it up. Very interesting analogy. And I feel like that's also like in line with what I try to do when I talk about stuff. Truth is a very like difficult thing to be entirely sure of, especially things like historical truths. I mean, even if we talk about a historical figure, we describe, oh, this person ruled this land. I mean, what was the lands then? Remember, land is just like concepts that we agree on, imaginary lines in the land, and the land changes over time, and so things are very malleable and you know, open to being discreditable. It's a very hard thing to figure out and deal with, the air quotes truth. And you know, most of us, where do we get our information from? Other people. And people are capable of interpreting the same information differently and being skeptical and whatnot, so I think we just need to be open about how we get information, where it comes from, and everyone should be able to talk about something they want to talk about, even if you're not an expert on the subject or whatever, right? I really believe that. I really believe in freedom of speech and being able to open your mouth and say what you want to say. But in doing so, like, no bad actors, no saying things on bad faith, like no, oh, I want this emotionally to be true, therefore I'm going to lie. Like, I don't believe in that. I believe in just being like open about your own ignorances. If you think you heard something but you're not sure, like, just say it how it is. Be honest and square, and I think, you know, conversation that revolves around that kind of candidness will lead to better places, you know. I hope so. Maybe some of you out there are thinking, no, it won't. Fair enough. But yeah, when we have a little chat on here, that's generally like where it comes from. Pyro Burnham says freedom of speech is not freedom from consequences. I'm not sure entirely what you mean by that, so if you wish to elaborate, I'll try and catch your message, Pyro. I believe... I mean, what is the consequence of speech? Like, I believe we don't allow incites of violence to be freedom of speech, right? It's generally not an accepted thing. You know, you're free to talk, but you're not free to command people to do horrible things to one another. That, I think's fair. But yeah, you could mean something different to that. I'm just not entirely sure. Pyro says, if you exercise your freedom of speech by spreading misinformation, being hateful towards others, i.e. racism, or say things that are generally rudely ignorant, you have to suffer the consequences of your words. Okay, that sounds kind of threatening in the sense that the consequences might be physical or whatever. I think I disagree with you, honestly. Like, even when people are being hateful, spreading misinformation, and being racist, I just feel like when someone becomes the arbiter of what are those things, to then take away someone's freedom to speak that, then there is a big problem. Because the consequences you're talking about, I am assuming, are going to limit someone's capacity to talk. And I think the problem there is that once you reduce people's ability to engage and talk and have freedom of speech, then someone becomes the arbiter of what are the good ideas, right? What are the rights and the wrongs? And who is that arbiter? Because that, you know, the status quo that says you can or can't say this or that can change. And, you know, one day it might be yourself who's on the end of that being told that you're in the wrong. So, you know, I would encourage good faith and looking for honesty, encouraging people not to go with hateful emotions in their pursuits in discussion, to try and look for the source of good, because spreading misinformation, it can be a perspective sometimes. It can be a case of, well, these are what I think are the facts, and you think those are the facts. From one person's perspective, they might not be spreading information. Tauba says, isn't it illegal to say Nazis did a good thing, for example? I don't know if it's legal or not, But if someone says that, I mean, that's their freedom of speech. I think we should then have the freedom of speech to counter that and go, no, here's why I don't agree with you, and hopefully educate or reach that person who's somehow come to see history in that light. You know, you've got to combat the bad with good. If you don't combat it and you silence it, then that silence is a power, and that power can be mishandled. You know, it can end up turning against what you thought it was for, essentially. That's how I feel on the matter. Freedom of speech is good because discussion changes minds. Censorship does not, says Kuroville Celestial. Yeah, that's a really great way of putting it. You know, discussion can enrich and allow us to communicate, whereas censorship doesn't. Censorship tells you what to think or what not to say. That's a very good way of putting it. Freedom of speech is a tool of society. When government has the power of censorship, it will inevitably be used by malevolent individuals. I don't know about that. Like, you know, government is a power structure, and therefore the power can be yielded to do nefarious things. It can also be yielded to do good. It really depends on who's yielding it. To say it's an inevitability, not so sure, because, you know, power can be used for good or bad, I guess. Some people confuse freedom of speech with freedom of consequence. You should always be allowed to say what you think, but if you say your opinion publicly, you have to accept that others will disagree with you publicly. This is not suppression under some... that's a word I can't quite say. Just disagreement. Yeah, totally. Consequence, as in that someone will disagree with you, absolutely fine. Totally, that's what we need. We need public discussion and for ideas to be exchanged, but for people to be able to disagree with each other, totally. It's just the word consequence. I feel like that can potentially be interpreted as being like, you can't talk anymore, consequence type thing. But yeah. Some people think they have the inside scoop after getting information from the dark web, not truly knowing who is providing the information and why, says Golden Princess Midas. Yeah, I know what you're getting at. That's an interesting way of putting it. A lot of conspiratorial thinking, anti-like elitism establishment type of information that seems to be going around these days, coming from these sort of anonymous sources on deep web or dark web, whatever you want to call it. It's very difficult to get through to what's kind of like fishy about that information. But the thing that I've learned, I guess, over time, coming from someone who is more, let's say, vulnerable to that kind of information, is that like when information is like upfront, direct, and candid, like you can get from the science education community on YouTube, you know, you're given not only the information but the tools in which to understand it. But when you go to the more conspiratorial side of things, you stray away from facts and from proofs and theories and, you know, information that is candid and honest in some way, to these appeals to shadowy powers and shadowy motives and reasoning of things that are secretive. But it has this persuasion where it puts you in the know. You're the one who knows what's really going on, and that tends to persuade a lot of people, it seems. Buying into those conspiratorial type ways of looking at things, I'm not so keen on it. I think you can make valid criticisms of people in power and power structures, but you know, the idea of the shadowy hand controlling everything, I think it's a little far-fetched. And it requires you to take that leap. And it has that appeal because it puts you in the place of being the one who knows.